Ernest Hemingway may have been one of the original sort of voices in the MGTOW movement, men going their own way, having put together a book of short stories called Men Without Women, having written numerous short stories, maybe every short story, about some of the, extolling the virtues of men and maybe forgetting some of the virtues of women, we'll say. But in today's video, we're going to get an opportunity to talk a little bit about why one of those issues for Hemingway was men in general. Welcome to Strip Coverlet, where we squeeze the bigger picture out of literature. I'm Adrian Fort, and we're here for another short story discussion, which will appear in two different short story discussion playlists here on the channel. Number one being just the short story discussion playlist, but number two being a short story by short story read along for Ernest Hemingway, the Finca Vigia edition. Today's short story is called A Natural History of the Dead. This video will have three sections: a So What Happened recap of the short story itself, a literary criticism section where we talk about some of the ideas on a literary basis in this short story, and finally a writer's corner section where we talk about all the ideas that can be taken from this short story as writers. And ironically, probably the entire point of the short story today is actually what we would normally talk about in the literary criticism section, is actually something that we're going to talk about in the writer's corner portion of this video. So, what happened? Well, our speaker starts by asking why we study everything scientifically except for war. Kind of human nature is alluded to. We don't study human nature in the way that we study animal nature, but really this is sort of exemplified by the fact that we don't study the act of war scientifically. Then our speaker starts talking about how men die like mules in war. Then he goes on to describe the aftermath of an attack on a munitions plant and finding dead women and putting out a fire. Then explaining how minor wounds can kill and major wounds can be survived, if even only for a couple of days. Then he talks about the Spanish flu and how that kills you. Then he pops a squat on humanists. Is what it is. Then he talks about two generals who died in war, even though there's a book called Generals Die in Bed. Then we go into the story of one of those generals who'd been shot in the head but did not die. The doctor on scene can do nothing for him, but he will not let the artillery officers end his suffering as they are wanting to do. They say that it is not right to let him be in the state that he is in. And the doctor kind of gets facetious and says, well, go ahead, shoot him, and then I'll report you. And how's that? And they start to, tempers flare in those moments, and the artillery, it was an officer, I can't remember the rank, decides to start walking towards the doctor. The doctor throws iodine in his eyes, blinding him. The officer then goes for his gun, but the doctor takes it from him. And in the middle of their kerfuffle, someone walks in and says that the general has died. So their entire quarrel was for nothing. But isn't that what war really is? So, what are we going to talk about on a literary criticism basis here? Well, that opening paragraph is really interesting, isn't it? That opening paragraph sets the tone for the whole story, and it really sort of takes you aback. It has always seemed to me that the war has been omitted as a field for the observation of the naturalist. We have charming and sound accounts of the flora and fauna of Patagonia by the late W. H. Hudson, The Reverend Gilbert White has written most interestingly about the hoopoe on its occasional and not at all common visits to Selborne. The Bishop Stanley has given us a valuable, although popular, familiar history of birds. Can we not hope to finish? I can't read today. Can we not hope to furnish the reader with a few rational and interesting facts about the dead? I hope so. So, kind of what is being conceded here by this hands off approach in the opening paragraph is hey, what if war? What if fighting? What if this sort of idea of tribal battle? What if this is just something that is natural to us? What if there is no escaping it? What if, in the same way that rams butt heads in order to win mates, we humans have to go to war? We humans have to identify with other humans and pick lesser humans that we think are lesser humans and go exterminate them or do our best to make extermination a reality? What if that is just part of our nature? All of this work that we do, all of this hoopla we make about peace, what if there is no peace? What if there will be no peace? What if there's just not a chance that that could happen? Because the moment we find peace, the moment we stop fighting about oil, the moment we stop fighting about government styles, the moment we stop fighting about who knows what, that's just the moment we find something else to fight about. What if that's the truth? What if that is what is actually taking place with human beings? That is an interesting conceit, one that um, I've kind of always felt this way, that there is something innate in the human experience that causes war. I think that if oil were all of a sudden not a big deal and religions were kind of homogenous or deleted, whatever the case, we would find something else to fight about. So, this idea of abundance with AI that might be on the way, some people think that this could be ushering in an era of basically utopia. I don't think I feel that way. I don't think that is necessarily what is going to happen at all. I think that we'll just find stupider things to fight about than we do now. Now, the next thing that I want to talk about, there is a passage in here. I don't know if I highlighted it or not. No, but towards the beginning of the short story, he says, men die in war. It's largely men. It's a big deal when you come across a woman who has died in war. That's why he tells the story about the munitions factory, because they were women who had died in those explosions. So I wanted to talk about something that is an interesting idea, but one that is maybe not at the forefront of socio-political conversation, but one that I think is a real discussion. It is about male expendability. This is from the Wikipedia article on the subject. Male expendability relative to I cannot read. Male expendability. The relative expendability argument, or the expendable male hypothesis, is the idea that the lives of male humans are of less concern to a population than those of female humans because they are less necessary for population replacement. Since the 1970s, anthropologists have used the concept of male expendability to study such things as polygamy, matrilinearity, and division of labor by gender role. The concept comes from the idea that from a reproductivity standpoint, one male may be able to impregnate or otherwise father offspring with many females. In humans, this would mean that a population with many reproducing women and few reproducing men would be able to grow more easily than a population with many reproducing women and few reproducing, or many reproducing men and few reproducing women. Basically meaning, in order to keep the species going, we could do with one male and 100 women, because at that point you could have 100 babies being made at all times. But if you had just two women and 100 men, you're only cooking two babies at a time, right? So the male expendability. So I think that this is actually a very narrow way to think about male expendability. I think that part of the dynamic of male expendability, we ship young men off to war to die. We tell young men, X, Y, and Z. The whole so this is interesting because it is seen as a negative by the feminists, but I think that there is a real double-edged sword to it. The whole um, princess phenomenon, right? Little girls raised to be princesses. Well, what does this mean? This keeps them. I understand the arguments about this being about keeping girls down, right? But it also instills in all little girls on some level that they're special. Little boys don't really always get that treatment. And I'm not saying all girls do, all boys don't. I'm not making that at all. But there is a there's sort of a mechanism in society, your little girl being a princess, that allows for that treatment immediately. Little boys have to earn it. If your little boy wants to play football but he's bad at it, well, how do you make him feel better about himself? You can't. Um, I think that part of this comes from men treating men the way that men treat men. I don't think this is a problem about femininity at all. I think that this is about how men do not care about the plight of another man, because look, we've all got it the same. Listen, pal, I had to go through it, so do you. Right? I think that and this is something that even in a lot of people's personal lives will manifest. The place where I work, a lot of homeless folk come through, right? And very few homeless women. And this is another thing about the expendability of men. How many homeless men are there? Well, homeless men are tossaways, right? Who cares? It's just a man refusing to work, refusing to get a job, etc. But women are rare among the ranks of the homeless, and people are generally much more apt to help out a woman who is homeless than a man. I've seen them come around and ask for stuff, right? All sorts of things. Personally, I am guilty of this. Uh, I am much more prone to helping women who find their way into my place of employment who are homeless than men who do so. Don't know what it. I can't. In my soul, a woman comes in and asks for, "Can you help me out with a drink and a bag of chips?" I can't say no. I can't. There's been men where I have. There certainly have been situations. But anyway, I think that it is an interesting observation about the expendability of men, and this short story is one of the probably best examples in Hemingway, at least to the best of my recollection, for this point to be made. The last thing, um, on page 337 of the Finkovisia edition, they have gone out to the munitions plant. It has been chaos. There was a fight at the munitions plant. There were explosions at the munitions plant. They've gone out and there are dead people in the field. They've been blown up. There are dead women in the field. They've been blown up, and there is a fire in a nearby field which they have to put out. After everything is taken care of, we get this passage. The pleasant, though dusty, ride through the beautiful Lombard countryside also was a compensation for the unpleasantness of the duty to our return. While we exchanged impressions, we all agreed that it was indeed fortunate that the fire which broke out just before we arrived had been brought under control as rapidly as it had, and before it had attained any of the seemingly huge stocks of unexploded ammunitions. We agreed, too, that the picking up of the fragments had been an extraordinary business, it being amazing that the human body should be blown into pieces which exploded along no anatomical lines, but rather divided as capriciously as the fragmentation in the burst of a high explosive shell. Always look on the bright side of life. Um, I think that this is part of human nature. We have to look for a bright side. We have to, if we go into dire circumstance, even if it feels like we lost, even if it was that we saw tragedy, we have to go back to some type of positivity, or we will just stop. I imagine, and I know that this is a weird thing to conjecture about, but imagine being one of the people on the crew cleaning up 9/11. If you did not tell yourself at the end of the day, well, we got a lot of work done today, how do you show up the next day? Right? Knowing the absolute catastrophe, the absolute tragedy that you're present for. The whole reason you're there is that tragedy. It would break you to not acknowledge a job well done at the end of the day, I think. Certainly there are people who don't. Certainly there are people that breaks. But it is an interesting thing that I think we are always compelled toward that. And finally, the writer's corner section of this video is about presentation. So this is an ironic and sarcastic presentation. Ironic and sarcastic because this is a cold, dispassionate exploration of nations at war. This is a cold, dispassionate, naturalist exploration of the worst part of the human experience, the experience of war. So I think that this is done for effect, right? And I think that we could have talked about this in the literary criticism section of it because of this short story, because that is, I think, the point of this short story. Only through saying, okay, well, let's talk about it in the most cold and dispassionate way possible, can we really get across the point that this is so ridiculous. If everything were the same as that final bit in sort of third person, close psychic distance writing, then it becomes a story again, right? You can write it off. You can say this is made up, this is fiction. When it is so cold and dispassionately accounted, and that's what it feels like accounting at the beginning of the short story. You are forced into a different mindset when confronted with the absolute cruelties, absolute absurdities, and absolute tragedies that are besetting our speaker. Because of that, you get through a point that is much, much clearer. Because of that, you get through the fact that there are people in this world on the front lines, etc., that have to accept the world in these cold, dispassionate ways. Otherwise, they will go mad. If you were, as the heated officer is at the end of this short story, so compassionate, you would look all around you at all moments and be absolutely destroyed by the tragedy around you. So, in order to simply to get through being on the front lines of something like World War I, you have to turn off the human portion of you. Turning off the human portion of you sounds like this cold, dispassionate presentation. Now, the reason I want to talk about this here in the Writer's Corner section is that maybe more than anything to ask a question. Is there a tone like this for every short story? Is there a tone that would tease out the ironies under every short story? Some storytelling apparatus like this, it's a naturalist history, right? Sort of a Animal Channel documentary of humans at war. Is the Animal Channel still a thing? I have no idea. For any point that you want to make, for any story that you want to tell, I am tempted to say that there is an ironic / sarcastic presentation, or a presentation that is not ironic nor sarcastic, but does tease out the absolute deepest point that you're trying to get across. For Hemingway here, I think that point is that people on the front lines have to be cold and dispassionate, and they therefore lose their humanity in what might be the most human thing that we do, which is war. So if you can come up with that storytelling mechanism for any of your stories, I say you got to pull the trigger and go for it, because this is so difficult. This is so on the nose, but in a sly way that it's almost like cheating as a storyteller, because you don't have to do everything perfect to get across the point. Anyway, guys, that's all I have for this short story discussion. If you like or appreciate what it is that I do here, hitting the like button really does help me out, as it tells YouTube to share this video with other literature lovers. If you find yourself here by chance but not design, literature is the only thing I talk about on this channel, dropping multiple videos every single week. There is poetry every Monday, and as always, I hope to have you back for the next one.